I'm Rachel and my brand is Rachel Sees Snail Shoes, and I'm going to show you how to make a pair of mules. Mules are slide-on shoes that are closed in the front and open in the back. And it can help to add a little extra height in your heel to help your foot just slide in and stay in, but it's not totally necessary. So here's another one with a good little tongue shape. And then another with rubber added at the bottom of the heel. So next I'll show you all the tools and materials we'll be using. So I want to explain that my process is different than traditional shoemaking. Traditionally, shoes are made on a last, like we're going to do today, but the entire upper is built in advance and then it's stretched around the last, and the last should fit your foot perfectly. And the uppers are usually made out of 2 layers, the lining leather and the outside leather. And in between those 2 layers, a toe insert and a heel insert and some other layers are often added, so it's actually like a 3-layer shoe. But what we're going to do today is just a 1 layer stretched around a last, but because it's made out of vegetable tan leather, it will keep its shape, and it'll develop some wrinkles and some character, but it's a perfectly good way to make a wearable shoe, and it's one of my favorite because it's easier and a little more just direct. So I just wanted to explain that you could also line your upper leather, so it would be 2 layers, but we're going to last it all at once it's already glued to itself. So yeah, that's the difference, and I hope you like my process. It's very simplified. Okay, so to make any closed-toed shoes, you need a pair of lasts. They're shoe forms. So these are size 9, wooden, plastic works too, and I'll talk more about those in a second. So you'll source a pair of lasts on your own, and I have lots of ideas. You'll need a hammer, a knife, scissors is really helpful, scratch awl, AWL, little needle nose pliers, a pen or a pencil. And then another really helpful tool is a shoe-shaped anvil. And these you can find online or at different cobblery supplies, but it's great for getting inside the shoe and being able to hammer. And then a measuring tape will help you too. But these are more optional because you can get away with not having a shoe anvil. Okay, materials-wise, so things you use up, we're going to use paper for making the patterns. We're going to use masking tape, some glue with a brush, either water-based shoe glue or solvent-based shoe glue. And then nails, so a few nails for attaching heels, and then a lot of nails for lasting. These are sharp little nails, and yeah, I'll explain that later. And then this is the heavy stiff leather for outsoling, so the very bottom layer of the sole. And these are the stacked leather heels. And we're going to add another layer to the heels, so this is some extra stiff leather that I had that I will cut and attach to the bottom of the heels. And then this is the footbed leather, so the leather that you actually stand on, also part of the sole, but the top layer of the sole. And then this leather is probably a 4-5 vegetable tan leather, and it will be used for our upper, so the entire top part of the shoe. And ideally, if you're a beginner making a Mule, I would start with the 3-4 vegetable tan. It'll be easier to last, but let's see how this goes with the 4-5. So that's all the material you'll need. Okay, more about the shoe forms, the lasts. So everyone will source their own lasts, and depending on what you find, that will determine the shape of your shoe. So if you find a round-toed last, you can only make a round-toed shoe. And if you find, say, a pointy last, you'll make a pointy-toed shoe. Pretty obvious, but and also, so this technique has some flexibility with size. So if you're size 8, you could probably find anywhere between a size 7 and a size 9 last, and it'll totally work for you. You can just adjust the shape that you create by making it a little wider or a little more narrow. So there's about one size, whole size of flexibility on either side of your size. So that's good to know. If you're making a completely closed shoe, not using my technique, but more traditional shoemaking techniques, you have to have your last mirror your foot completely. It has to be the perfect size for your foot, and that requires a lot of last modification. Anyway, I'm a size 8.5, and I'm going to be using today a size 9 last, so we'll see what comes of that. And just to let you know what we're up to, eventually with the lasts, we're going to stretch vegetable tan leather around it to create a stiffened shape, kind of like this, and it'll look like this on the bottom at some point. So that is the goal there. And now I'll show you how to use your unique lasts to make patterns that we'll then use for the rest of the process. So to take a pattern from the last, I'm going to start by tracing the sole of the last. So just place it on paper and try to get an accurate tracing. I'm going to lift the paper to meet all the contours like that. Okay, and this is the right shoe, so I'm going to just say right on this side, left on that side, and then you just need one. So I'm going to cut this out. Oh, one other thing. I want to take the heel block that I'm going to use, line it up to the back here, and make sure. So I guess my heel is just a little bit wider than the last is, so I'm going to widen out my pattern to meet that heel block. Because with a mule, because the back of your foot will shift a little bit, you want extra space for your heel to land. You don't want it to be too narrow back here. So this will be our insole pattern, otherwise known as footbed. Because we want to make the outsole pattern a tiny bit bigger because there's a little shrinkage when we get it wet. So I'm going to cut this out and then make a tiny bit larger one for the outsole pattern. So I'm just adding a few millimeters, mostly in length actually, but just a tiny bit in the width. And this is more of a precautionary move, just to make sure that everything is big enough. So again, right, and this is going to be your outsole. Okay. Now we need to make the pattern for the upper part of the shoe, the mule. And you might want to think about what shape you want. Do you want it to come to a point? Do you want it to be just a round arcing shape? Maybe it'll be some weird fanciful shape. But what you definitely want is for the mule, the covered part, to come at least halfway probably beyond halfway. If you just made the covered part come to say here, your foot would shift side to side too much. So you want to bring the sidelines back at least to the halfway point, just for stability. So it's going to be awkward, but I'm going to just take a piece of paper and crush it over the shoe form, like that. And it doesn't hurt to just start somewhere. So this might not be our final pattern, but I'm going to draw a shape that I think looks good. So I'm going to go for just like an arcing shape, maybe a little further back. And then just draw the line where the paper meets the bottom of the last, just to give yourself an idea. Because we want a whole inch, maybe inch and a half beyond that, and that's going to be our lasting allowance. Okay, so this is the shape I drew. I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to cut this out and see how it looks. All right, so I cut out that shape, and now I am pushing it back onto this shoe form, and I actually kind of like the way it looks. I don't think I'm going to do that much correction. Oops, it ripped a little. When it's made out of wet leather, these are going to like kind of stretch out and pull down more, so it might end up being more like this. Perhaps I would bring this part down a little bit more. So I'm going to make that correction now. Also, you can take this pattern, fold it in half, and cut it there to make sure it's symmetrical. But it's not totally essential that the pattern is symmetrical, because a shoe and a foot is not symmetrical. The inside and outside take up different volume, so it's kind of up to you. And the symmetry will be created when the right is next to the left anyway, so something to consider. So I'll just take out this added little section, and that will be my upper pattern. So this was created on the right last, so I'm going to label this side right and this side left. Okay, remember when I said I wanted to add an extra layer to the already stacked heels? I'm going to do that right now. So these are my extra leather layers cut out from other stiff soling leather, and I want to texturize all the surfaces that I'm going to join. So just using my scratch-all, I'm going to scratch up the whole surface and glue these together and hammer. So I put glue on all the surfaces. Now I'm going to wait 5 minutes for the glue to get tacky. The way this water-based glue works is you put it on both surfaces that you're going to join. You wait until it goes from white to clearish. And if you touch it and your finger comes away without any glue on it, you know it's tacky enough to join. So in about 5 minutes, I'll join these, hammer, and move on. Okay, so I'm going to use my footbed pattern to trace a right and a left onto the footbed thick leather. And the reason this leather is thick is it's going to hide all the imperfections underfoot and be comfortable. So don't forget to flip your pattern and definitely get one right and one left. It's harder than you would think to remember. So I'll start on this side. You want to avoid any really clear scars if possible. So I'll go right about there. And then flipping the pattern. Okay, now cutting out that footbed. Ideally, you'd cut right inside of your line, so just remove the pen line from your project. I like to do the first pass very lightly, just like you're drawing, and then a second heavier pass, and sometimes a third pass is required, but that seemed to do that. So again, just I'm holding the knife like a pencil around this metal part here, and my whole hand is grounded on the table. It's not like this. I'm not holding it like this. And I'm just patiently and lightly setting down that line. And slowly releasing the shape from the larger piece of leather. Okay, so now I'm going to trace my outsole pattern on the heavy leather outsoles. And sometimes you can line it up to save yourself a little bit of cutting by reusing a side. Again, a left and a right. If you happen to have access to a 5-in-1, or sometimes called a 3-in-1 cutting tool, these are great for cutting this thick, heavy leather. So most likely you don't have a cutting tool and you're going to cut it by hand with your knife. So you can do it dry. It's just going to take a lot of patience and a lot of passes with the knife to break through this leather. But, you know, it happens pretty quickly. But to speed it along a little bit, getting it wet will open up the pores of the leather and make it a little bit easier to cut. So you might consider doing that now. Okay, back to the heels. They're tacky. They're no longer white. The glue isn't coming off of my finger, so they're ready to join. So I'm going to carefully place the smaller layer onto the bigger. And these look a little different because I'm just using up scraps. And then I like to hammer things either over an anvil or over a table leg so it doesn't shake the whole table. So I'll show you. This is about there. And then you just want to hit it a bunch to make sure the layers are joined without any air pockets. Okay, so now we want to shape the outsole with the heel to give it some character and not be super flat. Basically, this is one I have made for another shoe, and this is what we're going to create is to be grounded at the ball of the toe, a little bit of arch lift, and then to join seamlessly with the heel block back here with a little toe spring. So to do that, we'll take your outsoles and dip them in water, either run them under the sink or dip them in a basin of water for just a few seconds. And then the arch is like the middle 1/3, but a little bit back from that towards the heel. And it only comes about halfway. So that we want to send up in like a little taco shape as much as possible. And then the broadest part of the toe is like the toe box area, and that we want to meet the ground fully while lifting up the toe to give you toe spring. And then we're going to send the heel area backwards so it can join with our heel block here. So we have this joined, we have a little bit of arch lift, the ball of the toes is grounded, and we have about 1/2 inch toe spring. That's what I like. So I'm going to do that to the other one, and then we're going to let them dry for at least 3 hours, maybe overnight. Okay, now I'm going to trace a right and a left of the upper pattern onto the upper leather. And of course you want to avoid any major flaws in the leather, so position your pattern wherever you can. And then flip it, of course. And the grain of the leather doesn't matter very much, but I would take from the same part of the leather. You wouldn't want to take one side from the belly and one side from the top of the cow because they might act differently. For the outside line that's going to be underneath the foot and lasted, it's not really important that you cut inside the line. You can just cut on the line. But for this line that you will see, it's really important to cut within the line. Just cut the line off from the get-go. If you cut too close to the line, you'll have to go back and recut it, which can be really a hassle. So I just cut a few millimeters within my line. Okay, so just to show you what we have so far, we have the heel and the sole that's still drying. We have our footbed leather that will sit on top of that. This is the stand-in for your foot. And then we have the upper leather that's we're going to drape over all these layers. And I labeled one right and one left according to the pattern. So now I get to set up for lasting the leather on the last, and we'll start that process. Okay, so I'm going to get the upper leather completely soaked in my little makeshift sink. Make sure the back and the front don't have any dry spots. All right. Oh, and I meant to mark the last with where I wanted the leather to land on it, but we'll just wing it. But you might want to decide how far your piece will come up and make a little dash with a pen before you start. Make sure they're the same on each last so you know where to place your leather. But I'm going to kind of pull this leather and just really like smash it onto the last so there's no air pockets, like that. And what I want to make sure of two things. I want to make sure there's at least an inch all the way around the outsides for the lasting allowance. And I also want to make sure that the inside and outside look pretty even, that it's not twisting one way or another, but it looks even to me. So again, I'm going to just make sure it's really pulled onto there. And I'm going to flip it upside down and start working in my lap. Like this. So I'm going to start by just putting a nail on either side of the widest part here, just to stake the leather and keep it in place. And lasting nails are really sharp, and that's to help you just stick it in the leather and it stays. And then you can grab your hammer or your lasting pliers, which are kind of like a pliers and a hammer in one. So once I get those two nails put in, I'm going to start working at the very top. So I'm going to use my pliers and pull and place one nail right at the top there, about 1 centimeter away from the edge. And I know it's awkward to hammer into your own lap, but I swear it's the way everyone works. It's the only way. And I'm going to take the pliers and put another nail right next to that nail, and I'm basically like trying to use up the material as fast as I can around the toe. So I'm gathering it into little pleats, and I'm stacking the nails close to each other, purposefully creating wrinkles to use up all that extra leather. And I'm going to tic-tac back and forth from that first nail. And I only want to touch the leather with the steel nails or the pliers on the bottom side. You never want to touch anything on the upper side with metal because it might mark the leather. So you'll see there's still really big wrinkles here, and I'm going to keep working, but as you get to the sides of the shoe it gets so much easier, and it's not really wrinkly anymore. It's more about just pulling it straight perpendicular to the last.
I'll get a wide one here first.
Okay. And let's check in on the front side. There seems to be wrinkles here and here. We'll just pull it backwards to keep it as flush against the last as possible, like that. You could really manipulate leather a lot. Maybe I'll jump to the back here and place a nail here to keep that line smooth.
It's hard to hold. Oops.
And then I space them out a lot more towards the back because it's more important to get a really defined toe. The sides will probably pull in or out depending on the width of your foot. So it's just less important to get like a very defined edge there.
Ready?
So here's the first lasted upper, all the nails here. And remember, the sole's going to be here. We don't want to see any wrinkles above ground, but I can kind of see some peeking over. So to mellow those out, sometimes I take the needle nose pliers and just like force these back, flatten them out. And then I take the hammer and tap the nails backwards a little, and I'm able to flatten out some of the wrinkles with my hammer to get a smoother and more defined edge. So I have one of the shoes lasted. Before I do the second one, I just want to measure this point. So this point here is just a tiny bit shy of 5 centimeters. So I'm going to mark a dot on this one. And that'll just clarify where I want my leather to start when I last this one. And the rest I'll just eyeball. So again, we want to make sure that all these wrinkles we've created are only seen on the underside, you know, and not ever the top. And these are pretty well hidden, but you still want to just go back and push them backwards, whoops, with the pliers. Kind of just force them back. And or take your hammer and kind of tap the nails backwards, get them out of your way, and then use the hammer head to flatten. So these are going to dry overnight, so they get really dry. They look pretty much the same as far as this is concerned, and the sides here and here. So yeah, we'll just wait and meet tomorrow. Okay, so today is the next day and everything is dry. The outsoles have dried and they're stiff, and the footbeds are the same as before. And then the uppers are completely dry and you know, tight against the last. They look pretty good to me. And I will now pull the nails out of the uppers so we can start playing with those. So here are all the wrinkles that stand off the flat part of the sole. I'm going to slice all of these off now, very carefully with my knife. So you'll roll your knife out a little longer than usual, maybe like 4 blades long, and lock it. And then hold this so that your left hand is all underneath the edge line so it's out of harm's way. And then take the blade and just kind of saw. So you just want to remove everything that's standing off. And we can always go back and remove more later. So it's okay to be a little conservative at the beginning. And if the knife part scares you, you can use the scissors and kind of just remove all these bumps with the scissors. All right, so we trimmed both of the undersides, all the wrinkles, so that the upper is now laying flat on the last. The flatter you get it, the more easy it will be to play with and get the fit right. But like I said, once this is glued to the insole and hammered flat, we can then skive it even flatter. So just get it relatively flat, scissors or knife. And then you'll be able to slide this off. Make sure it's completely dry inside. This is. And you'll slide your footbed leather in there, all the way to the very tiptoe. And then I'm just gonna put a few pieces of tape on the underside to just keep it in place while I take a look Take a look at it on my foot. So tape there, and then maybe a piece up here. Okay, and I might use one more piece to just tape the heel to the outsole for now, just so I can play with it all together and check that everything is correct. Okay, so here's the shoe taped up, and remember I used a size 9 last and I'm an 8.5, so it is a little bigger than I need it, which is a good thing. So there's lots of room here, and there's extra length that I probably won't need. So I will start by taping the upper a little tighter. And right now is the time you'd want to assess if you want to cut down the size of the footbed leather, because if it's too wide and you don't need it that wide, you could cut down the width of the footbed, and that way the upper would fit in a tighter way, but you don't want to modify it too much. So let me try just pulling in the upper as it is. Okay, definitely nicer and snug on the sides. I like this teeny bit of room so that when I walk it's comfortable. Doesn't need to be skin tight. I would say I actually like that extra width. I think I'm happy with that. One other thing, I'm going to grab a pencil and mark down the length I need this to be, and I'm going to cut that down to size now. When my foot's all the way in there, I only want, I'd say, a 1/2 inch behind my heel extra, so I'm going to mark a little line here. And that means, I think this is about a 1/2 inch I'm going to take off. I can scoot the heel a 1/2 inch forward when I adhere it, because you don't want to spend time sanding off a whole 1/2 inch of heel. So I'll show you. So instead of gluing the heel there, I'll scoot it forward, glue it right about there, and cut that off. All right, so now that I've trimmed the outsole down to size, I can place the heel block at the very back here and trace the line where the front of the heel meets the outsole, like that. And then I'm just gonna create texture all over this surface and all over this surface, doing little hatch marks, like texture this direction, that direction, as much as possible, especially around these outer edges. That's where the sole layers would start to separate first, if they ever separate at all. Okay, so here's my other foot, and I want to tape this one together and make sure it fits the same way the other foot fits. So I did my best guess and I taped the bottom. Looks like it could be just a tiny bit tighter. Well, it's pretty close. Yeah, maybe I'll go with that. We're gonna mark and glue the uppers down, and we can always correct for it at that stage just by peeling it up and pulling it a little tighter or looser. So I'll try them both on at the same time just to double check before I go on to the gluing stage. Okay, checking that they are taped sort of the same. Looks like they are. Maybe the left one could be pulled in a tiny bit tighter. Okay, remember when I pulled in the sides extra so it would fit me correctly? Now we want to remove this tape while keeping it how we had it. Actually, before I do that, I want to get a certain line. So I'm going to use my awl and kind of just reach in the toe pocket and trace a line where the footbed lands inside the upper. That's gonna just help me later decide where to glue up until. And in case everything shifts, I'll have that line to tell me where it should land. So reaching in and just pulling. And you don't have to get it all the way into the toe, just a few inches back will give you all the information you need. So, and then before I remove the tape, I'm gonna get a few outlines of where I can reach. So just making notes of where the upper lands on the footbed so that I will know where to scratch and glue. Okay, now I can remove the tape. And basically I don't want any overlapping. I want these to meet towards the middle. So I'm gonna cut away anything that overlaps. Just make really clear notes for yourself about where everything lands. Like that. And then it's faint, but you can see the line right up here. That's like our new edge line. And you can create texture in here where you're gonna apply the glue, like the flat sides of all of this upper. But it's already the hairy or rough side of the vegetable tan leather, so it doesn't need that much added texture. But if you lined your upper so that the smooth side of the vegetable tan is on the inside, you will need to add a lot of texture. So it's just a matter of like manipulating it so that you can reach in and get up to that line there. And there's always a way to just reach around and create texture. I like to, when I'm gluing the upper to the footbed, start with all the inside toe pocket areas because those will take the longest to dry and get tacky. So it's hard, but you're gonna reach your brush all the way in to the very far toe and just put glue on the flat areas. And the trick to this glue is to just spread it evenly so it gets tacky at an even pace so there isn't any big white clumps. Once I do this, we could like...
Yeah, so we should do it. Handle that.
So while this waits to get tacky, I'll give it about 5 more minutes, and in the meantime I'll glue the heels onto the outsoles. Cool. Okay, these are starting to look tacky. I can't see any white glue remaining. Looking deep into the toe pocket, there's no white clumps, so I think I'm ready. Make sure to get the coordinating footbed. And then to join these, I don't want to let it touch before I'm ready, so I'm going to send this all the way. Oops, it did touch. Send it all the way into the toe, trying to keep them separate. And once it's deep into that toe pocket, yeah, then you can start to stick them together. Great. You just don't want it to land shy of the very tip toe. And then you're gonna fold all of the upper tightly against the edges of the footbed. Working from the toe backwards. And trying to line up with the lines you drew. And checking in on this inside line that it's not too out or too tucked in. Okay, so that's my first joining. Before I hammer this and make it unified forever, I'm going to do the other one and try them on really quickly and make sure they're the same as each other and make sure I'm happy with them before hammering. So joining the other one now, again sending it all the way to the tip toe. Yep. And then starting at the toe. And you are the boss of this, so just you have to kind of manhandle it and force it to do what you want it to do. And I don't know if you can tell, but I kind of overshot my lines a little bit because I just knew that it was a little bit on the loose side, so I just followed my intuition, and we'll see how that worked out. Before I check the fit of the uppers, I'm going to join the heels to the outsoles. That way I can stand on these and check it all together. So these are looking tacky. No glue's coming off on my finger. So just using that front line as your guide. Press these together. And then I'm going to hammer it over a table leg or an anvil. Okay. Okay, so now I am sliding these on to see if I like the fit and to see if I need to make any corrections. I really do like it. Darn, I wanted to make a correction on camera, but I don't think there's anything I would change. But the idea is, like, if one was looser, if one was gapping, say here, I would just pull up this side. It's hard. You might have to shove an awl in there to get the glue to let up. And you'd peel it back a few inches, and I would probably just pull that in a few millimeters deeper. And then I would stick it together tentatively, try it on, make sure I'm happy, and probably mark the new spot and re-glue just to be safe. But because I'm happy with both, I'm gonna slide them onto a shoe anvil and hammer them. So if you're lucky enough or to have bought a shoe anvil, they're really handy, and it allows you to get inside the shoe and hammer all these layers and compress them. So before hitting it, always make sure this is totally supported on the inside by the anvil, so it's not draped halfway off, because if you were to hit it and it was halfway off, you would be denting the inside of the footbed really heavily. So every hammer hit, you want to make sure is fully supported. If you don't have a shoe anvil, you can still compress these layers. It's just a little more awkward. So over a table leg, you would just do some hammer hits where you can reach from above. Like that. And then reach in with your fingertips and really try to compress and massage the layers together that way. And then lastly, your own body weight. If you try them on and just jump up and down and use your feet to compress the layers, that will help too. Okay, so now the upper is hammered really nicely onto the footbed. We know it fits. I did allow a little overlap to occur here, so I just want to take my knife and skive that so that it doesn't feel lumpy. Skiving is shaving the leather in a gradual way so it doesn't stand out. And you'll notice there's this discrepancy here, you know, like these edges. So there's two ways to solve it. Either we can fill it in with little pieces of leather so that it's all even, and that's called, I call it creating a midsole, like a middle sole. Or you can use skiving, like I just did, to shave down all these interior edges so that you don't feel the transition at all. So that's a perfectly good way to make the bottom of your footbed feel comfortable and even. But I'm going to show you the midsole process because I've shown the skiving process before. But again, if you wanted to do the skiving, you would just take your knife, roll it out a little longer than usual, put your left hand inside the shoe to support the inside with your fingertips, and then you just shave, 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 and keep testing it by trying it on and making sure that you don't feel anything underfoot. So now I'll show you how to make a midsole. So let's start with this little heel area. You want to use some scrap leather that's the same thickness as your upper. That way where it meets the upper, it'll just feel totally the same. So I got this piece. It's larger than I need for the heel, and yeah, that'll work perfectly. It's cut from the same hide. So I'm going to take the shape with the smooth side of the leather. I'm going to get it damp. You can run it under a sink or use a spray bottle. And then make sure this is fully supported by the anvil. And make sure the leather you chose is overhanging on all the sides. And I'm just going to take this impression with my hammer, just of the front edge. So there it is. Do you see it? It's pretty clear. I'm going to cut that out with my knife or scissors. Okay, and then this will fit right on there, like that. So I can take this whole unit together, flip it, and use a pencil or an awl to define the outside now. There. And I'll cut that off, and then I'll have a perfect patch to glue in to make all the surfaces even. Like that. And I'm going to do the same thing up here. I can pretty much see it. I'll use a pen to outline what I see. And I meant to mention that this is a great opportunity to use the worst leather on your hide, like, because it's going to be totally hidden. So you can use any of the leather along the edges, anything with a brand or a wrinkle. Okay, so still seems a little bit big for that area, but that's okay. If it's too big, we'll just cut it down to size. If it's too small, we'll just add little inserts. It's very forgiving. So I'm just making marks where I want to trim it down. You want it to fit in really easily, not be overlapping in any way. Okay, so I texturized both the midsole and the surface I'm going to adhere it to. Same with up here. This is my little insert here. Both texturized, and then I'll glue these together. So I put glue on all the surfaces where the midsole will land, and sometimes it's all one piece, but sometimes it's just a patchwork of little pieces that will fit into all these areas. While that's setting up, I was going to put some nails into the heel block here and here. So the way we do that is just by making a pilot hole in the top, really deep as you can, like that. So that the nail can just sit right there while you set it in. And you could do this over a table leg, over the floor, or over an anvil. You want to hammer it until it's totally flush and you can't feel the head. Yeah. One more thing about the heel nails, you can put them almost anywhere. Sometimes I put them just right here and here. Sometimes I do 2 in the front corners and 1 towards the back. But if there's somewhere where the heel is kind of lifting off and not perfectly glued and flush, you might want to add an extra nail there to keep the layers connected.
Okay, there. Rolling.
So now that the midsole is hammered into place, you might want to check and see if you need to do any additional skiving. So if there's still some upstanding lumps at the toe, you could take those down a little further. Make sure that the midsole you added is joining with all the other layers evenly. So you might take a little shave off of that. Again, my left hand is way out of the way. It's inside the shoe, supporting from the inside. But everything else looks pretty flat. Okay. And while I'm at it with my knife, I'm just going to make sure the midsole is exactly the same at the back as the footbed. Because later it's going to be easy to sand the back to be even, but these little corners up here are more tricky to sand, so we want to get those perfect with a knife. Okay, so now I get to compare the upper, this whole thing, to the sole. So I'm just going to lay it on here, and I see a few things. I see that the outsole is a little bit wider than I need, and of course it's hand cut, so that needs to be smoothed out before we join these layers. Like I was saying before, this back side of the heel can get sanded when the whole thing is complete, but the front needs to be sanded now because it's too hard to glue this together and then sand just the very bottom. So just mentally prepare yourself to sand the majority of the outsole up till about here now before we glue it together, and then we can always do the back half later. So I'm going to take a pencil and just draw myself little notes wherever I want to sand extra off the outsole. So say this part's kind of protruding. Got that. Over here there's a little extra. But basically it's just a matter, oh, and then It's like a little wider than I need at that little juncture point here. So I'll take that down with the sander too. So I'm going to sand here, here, really the whole thing and just make it really nice, but I'm going to take a little extra off on this side. So I'm going to do that to both of them, sand the outsole, and bring it back in here. I wanted to say about sanding, I used a electric tabletop sander with the belt in the horizontal position, and I just press, I hold the shoe or the sole with two hands, and I press into the round part of the sander slowly and do several passes as I move around. And that's my technique. And that's the only sander I would recommend for this type of work. I've tried all the other ones and I think it's the best. So a tabletop belt sander. So now these are completely smooth and there's just like a little hairy edge around the top. So sometimes before joining that to the uppers, I just want to trim it and make it really clean. So if you can access that little top edge with a scissors, great. Or you might take a knife to clean that up. And once that's more trimmed up, I'm going to place it over all of my wrinkles and imperfections on the upper, and I'm going to take an awl and trace the line all around so I know where to scratch and glue. Okay, lining up the outsole over where we want it to land, and ideally you want the sole to come right to the toe. You don't want it to be back, you don't want it to be protruding forward. So I think I found the right spot, and then make sure it's not shifting to the right or the left, that it's lined up with the back of your shoe. Okay, and then gripping it tightly together, I'm going to take my awl and just create a outline where it will land. And that line will become the limit line that you'll scratch up to, and be sure to do lots of texture all the way to that edge, because this is the part we really want to adhere well. And you're going to do texture all over the entire bottom of the upper, as well as a little extra on the top of the outsole. Okay, this is the very last time we'll use glue, I promise. And I like to start by doing this careful edge, and then you can just fill in the rest. And we'll give it 5 minutes to become tacky at least. Okay, when it looks mostly ready to join, I would just start at the very toe and fold it back. So I like to work in my left. And then just check in with both sides and make sure it's not veering to the right or the left. and then use your fingers to join up all the edges as much as possible. But most of all, we'll use your own body weight or the shoe anvil to compress the layers. Okay, before I go sand the very back of the heel, I just wanted to make sure that they fit like I wanted them to, and they really do. And I really just want to take off the extra of the heel block that's extended, and almost none of the footbed, because my heel's pretty close there. Same with this one. But that's a good fit because as the leather stretches a bit, my foot will slide forward. So you want it to be right behind your heel. So I'm just going to take these back to the sander one last time and make the edges even around the heel. Okay, so I just sanded the heel edges so it's nice and even. And now I just need to do a tiny bit of final trimmings because I can bevel the bottom edge some places, but some places are hard to reach, so I have to use manual knife and scissors. So these corners by the heel I always get with a knife. Just continuing that beveled line. And then the top edge of the footbed is always going to have that little lip of leather remaining. So I just take a scissors on the curves and take off as little as possible at a 45-degree angle. And sometimes into the corners you'll have to use the knife. And then sanding, of course, is kind of tricky when you're doing a closed shape next to an open surface. So I did actually nick the upper just the tiniest bit. I don't know if you can see it. But I just wanted to let you know that if you do that, it's not such a big deal. We'll oil it, you'll probably forget about it, and it just gives it more character. It's not, this isn't like a factory perfect process. So the wet lasting of the vegetable tan leather on the last can leave it really dried out. So I want to condition it now with some leather conditioner. Anything with a lot of oil will work. Anything you would use on your skin, like a salve. I make my own out of almond oil, beeswax, and beef tallow. Anyway, I'm just going to try to rub this in all over, and it'll look a little streaky at first, but it will mellow out. And conditioning the leather will moisturize it and leave it just like a little bit darker than it was before. And I might as well do the footbed while I'm at it. And the edges of the shoe can use some too. And later on, if you want to paint an edge paint on the edges or burnish the edges with a hardwood tool, there's lots of edge treatments you can do that look really good. Okay, so here are my mules. They fit great. They will probably need a little breaking in, but they feel pretty good. There's no obvious like gapping. It's pretty snug. And the bottoms, of course, will be pretty slick at first, so be really careful walking on sidewalks. You might want to drag your feet on the sidewalk to give it a little traction to begin with, but over time the leather will develop a patina and kind of just age really well. You don't need to put rubber on the bottom necessarily, although it buys it a little extra time. But I like to keep some of my shoes just leather soled. Here, I even have one here. These are leather soles that I never put rubber on them, and they're just fine to wear. So yeah, thank you for following along, and I hope you are happy with your own project.